Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Wednesday, June 1st, 2022, and I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be in June. That's all I can say.
Although the weather here on the East Coast is a little bit too warm today, in my opinion, but I'm happy that it's summer and not winter, so I'll take that. Besides the fact that winter is football season, I like the being outside weather better. But yes, um, So while we talk, we're going to talk today some early quarterback rankings. We did our 1 through 12 last week. Tyler's going to join us again here later in the show to go through 13 to 24, and we're also going to hit some news and notes from around the league here. Make sure you find us on thecouchgms.com and our social media channels for more than you get from the show. Cody, why don't we jump right into NFL news? And we're going to have to start NFL news off with a sad bit of news again. New Cardinals cornerback Jeff Gladney passed away on Monday at the age of 25 after injury suffered in a car accident. So, as always, thoughts and prayers out to his current teammates, his former teammates, his family, hoping that they get through a rough time. Cody, what do you have anything to add?
Yeah, as always, all of us here at the Couch GMs just want to give our thoughts and prayers. Um, it's tough. We lost. Coming off of an offseason where we've already lost Dwayne Haskins, another young player in his early 20s. Jeff Gladney, he was kind of starting to rebuild his career. He was a former first-round pick. He ran into some legal issues that seemed to be settling. He found a spot with the Cardinals, and seemed like he was now ready to make a name for himself, remind people why he was drafted in the first round. Cardinals seemed like a good fit, and then the tragic accident that took place over the weekend. Tough news for everyone. Both organizations that he was on, they came out in support for the family, their condolences, and that's honestly we can do. It's a terrible situation. And our thoughts and prayers go out to the Gladney family.
It just shows it can happen at any time, and it's hard losing somebody that young. But everyone stay safe out there, and everyone, we're always going to be thinking of Jeff Gladney. But moving on to some other news around the league, we always know that there's news that hits the day after we record, and last week's was new practice squad and injured reserve rules that were worked out at the NFL meetings. So while we start off here with practice squad, so this is kind of replacing not only the old rules, but the COVID rules that were happening for the last few years. They are now allowing 6 veterans on your practice squad. There used to be a situation where you could not really add veterans to your practice squad. They are keeping, to an extent, the elevating a practice squad player for game day. You're allowed to activate a certain player 3 times without moving them to your 53-man roster. So a little confusing there. It's not 3 times throughout the season. It's a single player can go up 3 times. And if you want to bring them up again for a 4th game, you have to add them to your 53-man roster. But it's kind of a good mesh between the old rules, which I feel like it was basically just young guys. The practice squad was not really used that much, to now the practice squad is a little bit more fluid. It's going to see a lot more guys that are going to even see game action than pre-COVID.
Yeah, I mean the practice squad rules. I mean, I kind of wish they would have just kept the COVID rules. I think they worked nicely, but since they did change it, I'm especially glad they allowed the veterans to stay on. It used to be a 3-year cap, but you'll see guys like prime example, Adrian Peterson when he went to the Seahawks. He actually signed with the practice squad. This allows veterans to come in and sign on the practice squad. Yes, there's some contract repercussions for that, but they sign on the practice squad. They get to be a part of the team for a few weeks before they have to be activated. It gives the team some leeway for bringing in veterans. You'll see more movement. You'll see more players being picked up. So it is a positive for those guys. It will get a little bit convoluted when you start having to count the number of times someone moves up in the season. But honestly, if you move a guy up more than 3 times, you should probably just sign him to your 53 anyway. So it seems like a happy medium where they can't completely keep someone in the practice squad all season long. But not just the practice squad was updated. We also had the IR. So now there's a cap. It used to be unlimited during COVID. There's now a cap. It is 8 players can return, or I should say, you can 8 players, but the same player can't be returned twice
No, it
as
can't
a
be
part of.
returned 3 times. They can now return the same player twice.
Correct. That's what I thought I said. If I
Yeah.
said can't, I meant can. The third time his season is over. The big change is it is 4 games compared to 3 games during COVID, so there's an extra game in there. And it's also a good reminder that it's games, not weeks. So if there is a bye week, you'd be missing that player for 5 weeks come the season. But again, it honestly should just be unlimited. But at least we're getting more players being able to return, come back. It doesn't end their season. So another good move. Again, wish they would just kept the COVID rules in place, but at
Yep.
least they did something, and we didn't go back to what we were pre-COVID in terms of the IR.
Oh yeah, because if you were in a platform that did not allow for out players to be put on a reserve spot in fantasy, the IR and the reserve was almost completely useless. Like you'd use it for suspended players. You maybe have that guy on pup that's coming back week 6, and after that, it's just useless. But now teams are still going to use the injured reserve for short term injuries if you can bring back at least 8 players. I do also wish it was COVID, but I mean, pre-COVID, they were allowed to return 2 players and they had to be out for 8 games. Like it was so dramatically different that this is definitely a step in the right direction, and I'm a fan.
I mean, it is crazy how in our lifetime, our fandom lifetime, if you don't even count how long we've been alive, but how long we've just been fans of the NFL, because it's an even shorter span. When we first started watching, IR just meant your season was done. And then it went to
Mm-hmm.
1 player, then it went to 2 players, then all of a sudden we got only 3 weeks and all as many as you want. And now they're like they reined it in a little bit. They said no more than 8 activations all season, must be 4 games. So it's still way better in the past. And again, it makes the IR spot in fantasy a little bit more relevant. So definitely like to see that one. But you mentioned stashing players on your IR. And there was some news that came out in the baseball world that affected the fantasy world. I don't know if you guys are out there. If you're not big baseball fans, hopefully you saw it on Twitter. Um, I don't even know who Tommy Pham plays for, but he slapped Jacques Peterson pregame over the weekend over a fantasy football fight. George, as the bigger baseball fan of the two of us, why don't you give us a little bit more deep dive into this altercation?
Well, it doesn't really have much to do with actual baseball, but they both play outfield. But no, really, it was a situation from apparently back in 2020, which is funnier. I when this whole thing came out, I thought it was from 2021, but this is apparently way back to 2020, early-ish in the season, like the World Series was still happening. But Jock Peterson was stashing a player on injured reserve. It had something to do with the 49ers running backs, so Jeff Wilson was involved. Raheem Mostert got hurt first, got Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson then got stashed too. I'm not 100% sure if that's true. That's all speculation of reporters putting things together. And Tommy Pham, who said something about you're messing with my money, you're trying to manipulate rosters, manipulate the league. Even though this was technically a fair move, he took offense to it, and it kind of boiled over this past weekend. I don't know why it took so long. I don't know why it even came back up, but it's also been reported that Tommy Pham did the same thing, so I'm not sure what he thought was different compared to what Jock did, but it's a reminder that fantasy football can get serious, but it should not get serious enough that you're slapping a friend and getting suspended for 3 games from the MLB. Not that the average person would get suspended by the MLB for 3 games, but it's not worth it for that. But apparently, these guys had a lot of money on the line, and that was a big reason why Tommy Pham took even more offense, and it came to this.
Yeah, this whole situation is wild to me, and it is kind of unfortunate how we've had to piece it together. I know a lot of what
Mm-hmm.
George got back to you is Warren Sharp, who is definitely worth a Twitter follow out there if you care anything about the football. He's very into the analytics, and he did like a whole Twitter thread of him breaking down on based on sound bites who he thought it was, when it was, and that's how we got to the whole Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson injury in 2020. But that's not even the main point. The fact that one, I had a lot of money on the line. We're talking like week 7, week 8. Like, what are you in one of those leagues where the highest score gets a part of the pot each week, or like we said
But
all the
even
time,
yet, how
one
much money are you getting for winning a week?
right? That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what blows my mind. This wasn't the championship round. It appears. It appears it was in the middle of the season. Um, that was the big mind blow for me. But on the other side, like one, he was kind of accused of doing the same thing, and yes, this was a league where you were allowed to place players on your IR spot with an out designation. Well, I believe it was an ESPN league, and I know that changes differently how you play and stuff like that. And it seems like some of it stemmed that, well, Wilson wasn't technically on the IR yet. Well, if your league allows you to place someone in the out, like you should never have
Hmm.
someone in your out spot without, if he's out, put him in your IR spot and pick him up. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Peterson seems to be playing by the rules. That's what we preach on fantasy. Like you win your fantasy leagues in the waivers, you win them by making roster moves, you win them by taking advantage of your IR designations. We talked about it last week. You know, if there's a player that might be suspended for 2 games, might be suspended for 6 games, might start the season on PUP, when you're drafting and you know you have 2 IR spots, it's okay to take that guy. Just don't take a kicker in the draft, take someone else, and then move the guy to the IR spot post draft, pick up your kicker, and you're good to
Hmm.
go. So playing fantasy football using the tools, using within your league rules, we're not asking you to have commissioner settings and change the score to make you in the playoffs. But way to go for Peterson to be able to focus on the MLB playoffs and properly manipulating his fantasy lineups to work what was best for him.
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, I can sometimes barely properly manipulate my multiple fantasy lineups, and I'm not playing in the World Series at the same time. And those guys went on and won the World Series that year, I'm pretty sure. So, very interesting. But we're talking about potential suspended players. So, we have to talk about Jerry Judy, who we initially heard he was facing criminal charges a few weeks back. He now was cleared of those criminal charges, but he still could face discipline from the NFL for his domestic dispute situation. It seems like now, if he's not going to face criminal charges, the most he could face is probably a 2 game suspension if he has anything. But it's definitely a step in the right direction if you're a Jerry Judy owner in Dynasty. If you're looking at him in redrafts, that he could end up actually playing a full season. We'll find out more soon.
Absolutely, George. And I will say, I still expect him to get some sort of suspension, whether it's a game or 2 games. Then he appeals it and it goes down to 1 game. Like that's kind of the NFL seems to like if you make headlines like he did, you're still going to face some sort of discipline under their personal conduct policy. So that's my speculation. I have no insider knowledge. My guess would be a 2 game that gets appealed to a 1 game. Doesn't change how much I'll, you know, move him in my rankings. Players miss 1 game, 2 games all the time. I still think he'll have a solid season. But you'll have to wait until for a few weeks when we do wide receiver rankings to figure out if I have him as the number 1 Broncos wide receiver or not.
Ooh, we got a little bit of a teaser there, so make sure you keep listening in the next few weeks. But other potential suspension news: Deshaun Watson is reportedly facing a 23rd civil lawsuit amid his misconduct, assault allegation. I mean, I think his legal situation was semi cleared, but not completely. Obviously, the Browns thought that he would have a good chance of coming out of this fairly unscathed when they paid him all that money and made that big trade for him. But we still know he's probably facing a suspension. This definitely does not help that. And everything is still very fluid in the Watson situation.
Yes, definitely fluid. This is another civil lawsuit that was filed against him, so that's an important distinction. And it also was made aware that the person decided to come forward after watching the Real Sports HBO documentary on the Watson situation. So somebody else saw what everybody else had come out and said, and then they decided, you know what, I need to stand up uh for what happened to me, and then they filed a civil lawsuit. Again, we're not going to accuse him of being guilty or innocent until that is all figured out, but it is something to watch. I know we talked about it a lot on the quarterback ranking shows. Are actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. We talked about that on this episode, so stay tuned on his. But I mentioned I expect him to be suspended for a long time, and at least a minimum of 8 games. And with another lawsuit, it could be a lot longer.
Yes. So we'll hopefully know more before the season, like before your draft season, what it's going to look like for Deshaun Watson. But we're going to talk more about him later in this episode, like Cody said. So I'll leave it there. And we do have some quick free agent updates to hit. First one, not really a free agent update, but the Browns signed franchise tag tight end David Njoku to a huge 4-year, $56.75 million extension. This guy wanted out of Cleveland the last I remember because he was not being used properly. And then they just keep burying him in the depth chart. They still have a bazillion different tight ends on that roster, it seems like. And then now they go out and sign him to this huge contract when he's already through the first 4 years of his career and has not necessarily produced all that much. This doesn't seem like a really great move for the Browns, but I guess Njoku is happy with staying in Cleveland, and I do think he has the potential, don't get me wrong, but it just seems kind of out of left field for me to pay him over 10 million a year, and he hasn't really done all that much in his career thanks to everything the Browns have done.
You're not wrong, George. I mean, Njoku in a lot of situations might be considered a draft bust. I mean, he was drafted at the
Mhm.
end of the first round, never really truly lived up to his expectations, sometimes was stuck at the third spot on the depth chart, and then he wasn't. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option, but then they franchise tagged him, and now they signed him to a 4-year deal. Now, he is slated to be the starter this year. They did get rid of Austin Hooper, who was in some comparison. They still have young tight end Harrison Bryant there to be like a 1-2 punch. But Njoku is in line to be the starter. He could be, you know, a breakout tight end candidate because the tight ends are so bad in fantasy football outside of literally
What,
the top
four?
three,
Three? Yeah.
four. But after that, like Njoku has as much potential as ever. He can finally live up to that first round draft potential. I mean, he's gotten a decent second contract. So congrats to him. I don't know what it means for fantasy because he's been such a question mark going or in years past. But what tight end isn't a question mark not named Travis Kelce?
Fair. I mean, well, I think it's him, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, but it's Kelsey at the top, then the next two. But he's gonna fall into the guys that you're drafting when you're drafting a later round tight end. When you're like, I'm not gonna go put the stock into those big guys, and he's majorly boomer bust. But like you said, that's basically every single tight end. It seems like this money is showing the Browns have confidence in making him work. And sometimes in fantasy, when we don't know a lot, that is something we have to bank on and just hope. And if it's a late round pick, it probably won't hurt your team anyway. But we'll get some more tight ends even in a few weeks. So another teaser. But moving on to some actual free agent updates. Defensive lineman Akeem Hicks signed a 1-year, $10 million deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as if they needed another solid defensive lineman, another solid defensive piece in general. So obviously they're going all in and potentially last year Tom Brady, and this definitely helps.
Absolutely. Now, don't get me wrong. Akeem Hicks has passed his prime. He has struggled to stay healthy the last 3 or 4 years. So how much of this will actually make a difference, we'll have to wait and see. But he slides right into replacing Ndamukong Suh. Him next to Vita Vea, when healthy, is like a duo. Like it'll be hard to run against them for another year. You'll have to pay attention to that. That'll adjust some weekly rankings when Hicks is healthy. Now that's the big question mark. I know all offseason, as even as a Packers fan and him being a Chicago Bear, he was a guy that I was like, he makes a ton of sense. Like any team that is trying to win should go out and sign Akeem Hicks. He's going to want a ring. He doesn't have to be an every down starter. Just come in, put him in the rotation, let him be a run stuffer, let him produce, keep his snaps maintained, hopefully keep him available all season long. I think that's exactly what Tampa Bay is doing. I think this is a very underrated signing this late in the process.
Definitely. We see a lot of rotational defensive lines in today's NFL, and he builds up Tampa Bay to being able to do that. And then some running back news on the week. The Falcons added another running back to their running back room with Jeremy McNichols. McNichols did have a lot of success down the stretch with Tennessee when he was replacing Derrick Henry. That wasn't just him, but potentially somebody who can put up a fight for a starting gig. Not that anyone in that Falcons running back room is exciting, but someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The other free agent update was running back Darrell Williams, and they're both in the same category. He's Darrell Williams signed with the Cardinals, McNichols to the Falcons. Both guys, you've heard their name before. You've heard in the past. You might have even picked them up on their waiver wire. Nothing right now. They're still going to go undrafted at this point.
Mhm.
But those are names to keep in mind if, James Conner would get hurt. Okay, well, maybe we're going to pay a little bit more attention to Darrell Williams. Not worthy of being a quote unquote full on handcuff. It's not what I'm saying. but that's a name, mid-season, don't forget it. Same with Jerry McNichols. If they lose Cordarrelle Patterson, if they lose, I mean, they don't have a lot of people to lose. Maybe the rookie doesn't pan out like we think he might, because he was a later round pick. It's a name to watch. He didn't produce the best. I mean, that's why they went to Deontay Foreman. I know McNichols did deal a little bit with injuries. They had Hillard, so wasn't the best in Tennessee, but he does have some potential. Definitely a pass catcher, so I do think he could be a nice replacement for Cordell Patterson if there was some injury there. But again, like not even sure if you want Cordell Patterson. I know he had a really good season last year, but you're still not confident in it. You definitely don't want his backup sitting on your bench. It's not worth it.
Exactly. Like, guys to keep an eye on, but probably not going to help you. I think I actually like Darrell Williams better than Jeremy McNichols,
Me
but
too.
he's in a much more established running back room. But Darrell Williams was a starter over Clyde Edwards-Helaire for some points down the stretch and in the playoffs. So he's a capable running back, but he's not like your dominant, he's a starting running back. So just names to keep an eye on. Other thing to keep an eye on, we have a couple of news bits that we know are going to hit day of release here that we're not going to be able to cover. So we're going to do some predictions. How about that, Cody?
Hey, I
First
love it.
off, Madden cover is expected to be announced on June 1st. Who is going to be on the Madden cover?
So I think John Madden is going to be on the cover after he passed last year. I think he's going to be on the cover. Now, whether they'll do, how last year they did the normal version and then they did the GOAT edition, which,
Yes.
I mean, still had both of them on the cover.
Yes.
So it was more of like a marketing thing. I wonder if they'll do something, if they do the GOAT edition with John Madden and then a player on the normal edition. So while I think John Madden might just get all of it, because that seems like what they've been doing, is the special edition is still the same player. It might just be a different picture.
Mm-hmm.
But for the sake of prediction, I will go ahead and give me the Madden cover announcement, and I think it will be Cooper Kupp.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with you, I guess, on more than one front, that I think it's going to be either just John Madden or it's going to be John Madden plus the other edition's going to have a player. But I was going to go a step further than you and say that because Madden doesn't seem to like making covers without quarterbacks too often, it was going to be a two-player cover of Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp.
Interesting.
Because
I can
Matt
see that.
Stafford, finally breaking through after he left Detroit. That's a big story. Cooper Kupp was a potential MVP last year. I think Madden could do that.
Yeah, I think they could definitely pull it away. But I think it's interesting we both picked Cooper Kupp. I was debating him and Joe Burrow. If I was going to go quarterback, I would have went Joe Burrow. But part of me still says it's going to be John Madden, and all these predictions of actual players will not matter.
It's going to be Tom Brady, though, for the third straight year, actually.
Would not be surprised. Maybe it'll be him in the Fox broadcaster suit, and then the John Madden. That's probably what they planned. Him in the broadcasting chair, and then
Oh.
John Madden in the GOAT edition, and then he
Or you put
retired.
them side by side because, Madden used to be a play-by-play announcer, too. So you could just be like, we're old, old in the booth, new in the booth.
That's true. Very, very true. That's not the only thing that's taking place tomorrow, or I should say today. We're recording this the evening prior. That's why I said tomorrow. But on June 1st, the match, Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers, or no, Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers versus Josh Allen and Kermit the Frog, as Aaron Rodgers keeps calling him in promo for this, which is Patrick Mahomes. Face off in the unique golf game. It's not a true golf match. It's kind of like a little bit of best ball versus, who can make this putt type of thing. But it's a fun time. It's the only time of the year I watch golf because it's NFL players and I know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some rooting interest. There's been a lot of social media back and forth. But George, are the old Bucks going to get it? Or the new young ones?
Well, first I'll say I think it's pretty interesting that they made the match this time two players versus two players, as opposed to it's recently been player and golfer versus player and golfer. But I don't think that ketchup on steak has anything to do any business being on a golf course. So I'm going to go with the old Bucks and say that the guys who have been in the match before, Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, will win.
you might call me a homer, but I think Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady are going to pull it out. One, because I think this is my like 2 cents non-important golf breakdown. I think Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes will look the most comfortable on the golf course, and then I think Tom Brady and Josh Allen will be the two that are having quote unquote the most fun, the most jabs back and forth. So I think the State Farm boys are going to get a little competitive, and I think Tom Brady and Josh Allen might be a little bit more loose cannon on this. But I think it's going to make great TV, and definitely you should check it out.
Maybe
Not a
Tom
sponsor.
Brady, maybe Tom Brady and Josh Allen can get the Patrick Price as they're finishing their round there. But yes, that'll wrap up our news segment here. Tyler's going to join us here in a second as we jump into our latest quarterback rankings. We're going 13 to 24. Hopping right into our quarterback rankings here. Part 2, we're going 13 to 24. And we start off this week, just like we did last week, with we're all in agreement at number 13. And that is Derek Carr of the Raiders. I'll have him at 13. Guys, why do you have him right here at the beginning of the QB2 range?
Because he's a good quarterback still. I mean, he looks like Sid, which I'm sure Snyder got mad that he didn't get to say that one because I probably stole it from him. So there is some like doubts, like, hey, you got to take it, but he's letting his hair grow out a little bit, probably to combat that. But he got his best friend at wide receiver. He was already top 5 in passing yards last year. Like, this is another great example of why waiting on a quarterback as well. Hunter Renfrow, he was a top 5 wide receiver for parts of last year. Why? Derek Carr was throwing in the ball. So Derek Carr, solid option. If you don't get him in your draft, make sure you pick him up on the waiver wire.
Yeah, Hunter Renfrow, man, that guy, he gets to me. I had enough complaints about him last season because he looks like, an uncle at a barbecue. But that's besides the point. Yeah, Derek Carr is solid. I mean, he puts up points every week. He's not the pretty option. He's not the quarterback you're like excited to take. Um, no one's like, oh, dude, sneaky pick. I'm gonna win my league. I got Derek Carr. No one's gonna say that. Not one person. However, if you have Derek Carr as your number 2, I mean, I guess if you can have him as your number 1 and then just have another quarterback that's decent shortly after it. But if you have him as your number 2 quarterback, you're not going to be upset with it. If your number 1 goes down, he's a guy you're comfortable having to slot in there. Or, if you take somebody that we've mentioned in last week's episode, feel free to go back and watch that. But if you take somebody that we mentioned in last week's episode that we're like, hey, you kind of have to play the matchups, hey, maybe his matchups are good. It's not a bad option. Derek Carr, again, not a league winner, but a solid quarterback.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if there's too much more I have to say except, yeah, matchup based starter. Pair him with somebody in the later rounds here and could, easily pilot your team right to a fantasy championship. Let's move on to number 14 just here right away. We're going to talk about Kirk Cousins. And I have him the lowest of this group. I have him down as my 16th quarterback. You both have him at 14. So Cousins, as long as he's playing on a Sunday afternoon, I guess he's all right. Honestly, he is very comparable to Derek Carr. It's just because he's not flashy, I kind of have some guys who I think could break out and, you know, be those, this year's next big thing quarterback over him in my rankings. It's not that the fact I have him at 16 is like, oh, well, he shouldn't even be touched. He's most likely going to hit your waiver wire out of the draft. It's just happened in the last few years, and he's going to be a bye week fill and a solid one for another team because it's every single year it seems to be the same exact script for Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, he was a top 12 quarterback last year. He finished as quarterback 11. So he has quarterback 1 potential. He probably has the best group of weapons of the guys left, whether that's, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. They'll get Irv Smith Jr. back. Like, he has pieces around him. He's going to put up yards. He's a pretty efficient quarterback. He doesn't commit a lot of turnovers. It's not the prettiest, but it's a solid guy and reliable. He's a solid streaming option every week. If you need a guy to fill in your bye week, like you feel pretty confident going up with Kirk or going with Kirk Cousins. So, I mean, right here at 14, borderline quarterback 1 makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and if we're talking a little bit of a different strategy. I love having the quarterback and wide receiver one pair ups in fantasy. It's nice to get those double points when they score that touchdown to the main guy. So if you have Stephon Diggs, it's nice to have Josh Allen. If you have Keenan Allen, it's nice to have Justin Herbert. If you go out and get Justin Jefferson, maybe take Kirk Cousins late. I mean, Jefferson's going to get the ball. So you're talking about every time he catches the ball, you're getting double points. You're getting the points from the receiver and the quarterback. Every time Justin Jefferson is grittying into the end zone, you're getting those double points. It's a nice little combo to have. So he's not a bad snag late if you're a Jefferson owner.
Yeah, I mean, definitely as long as you pair him with somebody that if they're playing on a Sunday or a Monday night, I don't want to touch Kirk Cousins, even though I think that stat might be starting to even out. But you're right. I think at some point we're gonna have to talk about stacks here. So putting that one into the bank of things to talk about later. I can move us on here to number 15, and it is Tua. And I'm still not going to say his last name because we have not said his last name on this podcast yet, and we're going to refuse to until we are desperately, forced to. Very high variance for the first time. I think this is the highest variance guy we've had in our rankings so far. Cody has Tua at 17, Tyler down at 19, and I am all the way up at 14. I went first on Cousins, so I'm going to let one of you guys go first on this.
I'd rather
Tua's
you
garbage.
go first.
Sorry.
You're letting me go first?
Yeah, I want to
okay.
see why you have him at 14.
Yeah.
I view Tua in his situation as the exact same situation as Jalen Hurts. Obviously, by how far down he is in my rankings, he's not the exact same as Jalen Hurts. But if he is going to do it in the NFL, it is this year with this set of weapons. They went out and got him Tyreek Hill. He has everything he could ask for in an offense. So this is me being optimistic and saying this offense is going to make him better. He is going to make Miami a contender, and he is going to be a decent fantasy quarterback because of it.
That's bold. When did you switch to Snyder?
Right.
Like don't get me wrong. Like Tua, he seems like a great guy. Like, he might, give you a 25-point week one week or something like that. But he is not a guy you're going in, because we're talking backups and we're talking buy spot fills. And obviously a lot of buy spot fills is matchup dependent, but Tua isn't a guy that you can, because you just don't trust him to, be an elite down the field passer. You don't expect him to walk into a game and get 300 passing yards. Yes, he has Tyreek Hill now. Yes, he has Jalen Waddle, who had over 100 receptions as a rookie. Those are nice pieces. Like, I like both of those pieces as primary options in your fantasy lineup. And you're like, well, if you like both of them, how come you don't like Tua? Because I think literally they're going to produce a lot with the ball in their hands, whether that's on, it's not going to be all end arounds, but they're going to be required to, take a slant 70 yards. Yes, he'll get the passing yards for that, but that's how they're going to convert in this offense. It's nothing against Tua. He seems like a great guy. But I'm not even as low on him as Snyder is.
Look, I'm sorry, but anytime you have to start talking about the personality of the player, we're talking trash on them for fantasy or their ability. Like, he's probably really nice, but yeah, no, at that point, we're talking smack. I think Tua is garbage. I mean, I wanted to like Tua a lot fantasy wise. I'm sure he has a great personality, winning smile, but as far as fantasy goes, I don't like him. I don't think, like, I'm sorry, but we cannot ignore the video that was posted of Tua throwing the deep ball to Tyreek Hill. It was in practice. There was no rushers.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
There was no defensive coverage.
Obviously,
there was nothing. Miami left the video up. It was just practice, and this dude could not hit Tyreek Hill on a deep ball in practice with nothing else going on. He severely underthrew it, and yet Miami left the video up for no reason, and it has been the talk of the town. I don't think Tua has the arm to get it to Tyreek to really utilize his strengths. Yes, Tua might be able to put up some decent points some weeks because he throws the short slanted Tyreek, and Tyreek just makes 18 people miss on his way to the end zone. We've seen that plenty of times before. It's possible, but I just don't trust him. When it comes to fantasy, unless it's a guy that I think has that potential to give me 40 or 5, I don't like the risk. I want consistency, especially drafting around this time. I would rather have the guy like the Kirk Cousins, who I know is going to put up, 15 points every week. No, he's not going to get me the 25, 30 points, but I know he's getting me 15. Tua could get me 5 every week. He might put up like 20, 25 one week max, but that's not enough of a reward for me to want to take a chance on him. I'm out on Tua.
I mean, Tua's got Snyder's Madden offense around him, honestly, and it's a really good run after catch offense, which, like you mentioned, give it to Tyreek on a slant, he takes to the house. Jalen Waddle can obviously do the same exact thing, and we'll see if that actually benefits. But you're talking about inconsistency, and our next guy on the list is Trey Lance, who, I mean, first off, we have to say he still might not even be the starter. We don't really know the situation with Jimmy Garoppolo. We're projecting him as the starter. You're very high on Trey Lance compared to us. You have him at 15. Cody and I have him at 18.
Nope. Other way
You
around.
I'm at 15.
Sorry, I'm reading this backwards. Cody, never mind. You're off the hook, Tyler. You have him at 15. Tyler and I have him at 18. That is very high for a guy who we're not even quite sure is going to be the starting quarterback, and has a lot of question marks going around him in camp saying they don't really love his progression so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing stuff of, teammates praising him and stuff like that, but we're talking OTAs, we're talking guys in shorts, like, let me see preseason, let me see training camps. That's why these are early rankings. And yeah, I'm projecting Trey Lance to be the starter. And you compared Tua to Jalen Hurts because of the situation. And I'm going to compare Trey Lance to Jalen Hurts because he is a running quarterback that I actually think probably has a better arm than Jalen Hurts. But he might not even start week 1. I still think he will, unless Diva Samuel demands that Jimmy G is the quarterback for me to play this year. Like, unless he gets like some of the, like, they're going to let Jimmy G be the backup, and then they're going to roll Trey Lance. They gave up 3 first-round picks last year to get him. Like, this is their guy. We did see him in action. It wasn't, we saw him in the Wildcat. He scored a touchdown in week 2.
Is it really the Wildcat if it's actually a quarterback out there? Let me just ask that question first off.
Sure. It's probably not. It's probably just a read option at that point. But he did start in 3 games. In those 3 games, he had 20 points, 14 points, and 19 points. So those are solid outputs for a quarterback in limited action. In the game where he only had 14 points, he had 89 rushing yards. So, like, he balanced it out with rushing yards because his passing wasn't on par for that day. The other games, he had a lot more passing options. We saw in week 17, this feels very similar to what we saw with Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying it's going to be Patrick Mahomes by any means, but we saw, a strong week 17 after Alex Smith led them to the playoffs. Patrick Mahomes came in the next year, and he was a star. Not saying he's going to hit that ceiling, but it feels like a very similar situation. And getting a guy late, like, if I'm drafting, I'm probably going to take Trey Lance over a guy like Kirk Cousins because of the upside, but I still rank Kirk Cousins higher because I think it's a safer pick, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of backwards thinking, but long term, like, I want the upside because Trey Lance could be a top 12 quarterback. I don't see that for Kirk Cousins unless it's right at 12, but I also understand the risk of Trey Lance falling to outside the top 20.
All right. Fair enough. I'm good with that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next guy. Next guy is, we're a little bit closer than we were on Trey Lance, but now we're talking about, I have him at 16. George and Cody have him at 19. A guy who had a rough year last year, despite the fact that we were expecting big things, and that's Trevor Lawrence. This is another guy. I think it's in the same boat as Trey Lance, except we got to see more from Trevor Lawrence last season. It's a rookie that we expected a lot from last season, and he just didn't live up. Trey Lance, in the sense that he had very limited starts, and when he did have starts, he didn't perform well, and he wasn't the starter all season. Trevor Lawrence started, he just didn't get it done. Now, we're talking about he gets his best friend, Travis Etienne, back this year, so that's another weapon there. They did lose DJ Chark, although they didn't have him last year. I like what Trevor Lawrence, I like what he did in college. I think that he has been consistent his entire life. He has never been inconsistent until he hit the NFL. I understand some people don't adapt to the NFL the same way as they did in college and high school and all that. But at the same time, Trevor Lawrence is a winner. He always has been a winner. He always has been a successful quarterback. he had some rookie growing pains. I mean, he was on the Jags. If I was on the Jags, I would suck too. That's just what they do. That's what they're born to do. But I think he's going to figure it out. I think he's going to put up some points. He's not a guy that I love, not a guy that I would want to start, but he's a backup quarterback that I would trust to sit my bench in case my starter went down. Um, and a guy who does have potential to get some bigger points later in the season. So that's why I have him at 16.
I think you're just going like a half a step further than I am with Trevor Lawrence. Like, I have him at 19. Basically, what that's saying is like I wouldn't really want to draft him, but he's somebody I'm keeping an eye on the waiver wire for because I think he does have that potential to be a lot better than last year, to break out in the second half, be somebody who can be your bye week fill in, maybe be a matchup based starter later. But I don't have the faith in that enough for me to say I'm going to actually draft him as my backup quarterback. So you're very similar, despite having him only like three rankings higher than I do. I'm just not quite ready to draft him where you're ready to draft him, but we have similar thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to prove it to me. Like, I think he has a ton of talent. He's not a guy I'm drafting. Like, he could be a top waiver wire pickup come week 2, week 3. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he has the talent. But I just have to see it first. That's why he's pretty low for me. Still a quarterback too. I mean, if you're in a 2 quarterback league, I mean, we talk a lot about, standard scoring or standard league setups with 1 quarterback. If you're in a 2 quarterback league, you're going to get one of those top guys, and circling that back with the Trevor Lawrence, that's a great option. But in terms of a 1 quarterback guy, he won't be drafted in most of your leagues, in my opinion.
Yeah, and now I think that will move us on to number 18 and even bigger question mark, and that's pretty much shown by our variants here. Deshaun Watson, the new Cleveland Browns quarterback. Tyler has him all the way up at 15. I have him at 17. Cody down at 24. I'll just ask first, is this Tyler optimism that he is going to play almost a full season where you have him at 15? Because if you can tell me he's only missing 2 games, he's going way up higher than 17 for me.
Yeah. Yeah, this is optimism that he's going to play a lot. And even if he misses games, like, I think that this is a quarterback that we're talking about has been like a top 10 quarterback every year he's played. Um, we're also talking about my quarterback 15. So, in my opinion, still a backup quarterback, still not my number one. Now, let's say he doesn't play and really only takes off in the second half of the year. Fine. You're talking about a former top quarterback, a former top 5, a former top 10 quarterback coming in at the fantasy playoffs and, you know, potentially being the guy he used to be. That's value. As in my number 2 quarterback, if I'm taking a top quarterback, let's say I grab a Joe Burrow, a Dak Prescott, one of those guys, and I could ride with them for the first half of the year and be totally fine. And then you give me a potential top 10 quarterback sliding in the second half of the year, the fantasy playoffs, in Deshaun Watson. Somebody else has some injuries going down. I can trade a Joe Burrow for a great wide receiver and still have this top quarterback in Deshaun Watson. Boom, I just won the league. I think the potential for this guy is so much bigger than the other guys down here, which makes his value so much higher. Yes, it is absolutely bust potential. And I know I talked about if I'm taking a backup, I want consistency. But I did say if I'm taking a backup, I want consistency unless the boom is big enough to take the risk. And I think Watson's definitely big enough to take the risk, in my opinion. I am the hot takes guy, so maybe that is why I'm so high, but that's just the way I'm looking at him. I think he has that potential to be a league winner at the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm the opposite. Like, I don't think what you're saying is wrong by any means. Like, he could be a league winner, but on the opposite, I think he's suspended at least 8 games, if not longer. Like, if he was out for the whole year, I would not be surprised. Like, that's where I'm at with this situation. I mean, there's been some rumblings, like we saw with the I can't think of the baseball player that just got suspended for 2
Trevor
seasons.
Bauer.
Trevor Bauer. Now, granted, they're different situations and stuff like that. But what they did for a domestic violence case, what this is with all the, the actions, whether came out in court, it's still a personal or a conduct policy in the NFL. So they don't have to rule based on what the court says. They do it if it's detrimental to their league. So I could see this being a long-term suspension. And that's why he's at 24 for me. He's right there at quarterback too. If he only misses 2 games, I'm with you. He's moving up. on my fantasy rankings. Like, he'll be top 12. Like, I'm not going to lie. But I think he misses a lot of time. But I will say this. A lot of these guys after, Derek Carr, like, I'm not drafting. Like, I'll play the waiver wire for them. Deshaun Watson, I would draft, especially if your league has a suspension spot or you're allowed to put suspension on IR. If you have kickers in your league, which you shouldn't, but most of you do, don't draft a kicker. Take Deshaun Watson with your last pick, then put him on your suspended spot. You don't even have to drop someone for a kicker. And now you have the potential, if he is only suspended 6 games, 8 games, like, you have the second half. Now, granted, he didn't play it all last year. So we're projecting what we saw from him 2 seasons ago. That is another reason why I do have him a little bit lower.
Yes,
I
but
think
before you go, George, I'm sorry.
no,
I
you're
just
fine.
wanted to say another thing is you're talking about he might miss the whole season for suspension, and we don't know yet. Fine. But we also just talked, the person before him was Trevor Lawrence, where we all agreed not the most beautiful of names, maybe not a league winner, but a solid quarterback too. But we also agreed he's probably not getting drafted. So you're telling me you can get a potential league winner at the end of your draft in Deshaun Watson and wait. And then once you find out, hey, he's not suspended for the full season, cool. You just got the steal of the draft. But he is suspended for the full season. Cool. Drop him and pick up a guy like Trevor Lawrence or one of these other guys right around here we're about to mention, and you're still getting a solid quarterback too. I think the backup quarterback market is so deep that it really cannot hurt you in any way to draft Deshaun Watson, especially at the end of your draft.
Yeah, and I think Cody redeemed himself slightly by saying that Deshaun Watson should be someone you're drafting as a flyer at the end of the draft. Because when you had him down at 24, I'm thinking, this guy's avoiding him at all costs, and it doesn't make sense to me because of what everything Tyler said. I agree with that. And that's why I have him at 17, because maybe there won't be 17 quarterbacks drafted. That's a little bit high. It's probably more like, what, 14, 15? But he should be going in the last 2 rounds of your draft because of that potential. It happened last year, and we were even more pessimistic about him playing last year than we are this year. I was almost ready to run a game with you guys, and we can still do it if you want to. How many games Watson suspended and where you would rank him? So, like you said, 8 games, you have him down at 24, but really it's probably more like 15 if you're considering how many players you draft, correct?
Well, one, I don't like to take a if you're suspended. I think it also depends too if we're going to do, this game. Does your league allow roster spots for a suspended player? Like, if it
Fair.
does, if it takes up a roster spot, I understand the value, and some people might disagree with this, but I'm not going to hold Deshaun Watson for 8 to 12 weeks. And again, these are early rankings too, so I fully expect by the time you're drafting, if you're a smart league, like we've mentioned all the time, drafting in August, we'll have clarity on what the situation will be. Whether he's appealing it, whether he's been suspended for 8 games, 12 games, 6 games, 4 games, we'll have clarity by that point, and these rankings will be adjusted. For me, the amount of games I'm expecting an 8 game minimum, not 8 game maximum. So I think it's going to be at least 8 games with potential of being 12 to a full season. So that's why he's so low for me. 4 weeks of Deshaun Watson, if I don't have the roster spot to put him on a way where it actually doesn't hurt me, like, that's not worth the value. Like, maybe I'll try to pick him up 3 weeks earlier at something at that point if I wanted to take a flyer on him. It is a new team. It is a guy that hasn't played for a while. So I think there's a lot of big question marks outside of the whole situation that he's in. But I don't think you're wrong by saying either, like, he could be a steal of drafts if he is only suspended for 8 games and you do have that IR spot that allows suspended players.
Okay. I think that pretty much clarifies what we were trying to go with Deshaun Watson. I'm sure our rankings that come out, not the early rankings, will have a lot more clarity. We move on to number 19, and that would be Bears quarterback Justin Fields. Another high variance guy where Cody has him down at 25, Tyler at 17, and me all the way up at 15. So he's probably one of the last quarterbacks to be drafted as your quarterback too. And I think I'm just going by boom potential and the chance that he has to break out. Like him and Tua were very close in my rankings. I obviously was higher on Tua than them guys too. I had him at 14. That section of my draft was guys that I would draft at the end of a draft that have the ability to make that big jump earlier in their career, but they're high boom, high bust. I'm hoping I'm not relying on them because I have a solid quarterback one to go with them, but I'm holding on to them in case they end up being even better than that guy or they become trade bait later or something like that.
Yeah, I think Justin Fields is a talented quarterback. He's a guy that I have at 17 because of his potential. He is a mobile quarterback. That is a cheat code. If he can really start putting that together and get some passing going on too, I think he'll be great. He is a guy that burned me last year because I was hoping he would break out and it did not quite work out. I think he might still be a year away, which sounds crazy since I have him ranked at 17, which I guess it's really not that high, but it does seem high. I think next year he'll be great. This season, I think he's still going to have his growing pains. It's still going to take him some time to figure out. In a dynasty league, I would by all means go out and snag Justin Fields. I would trade for Justin Fields while his value is lower. I would do whatever I can to get Fields in a dynasty league. In a redraft, I don't hate taking a chance on Fields at the end of my draft. Um, but at the same time, if there is somebody else available, or if you would rather ride the waiver wire for your quarterback too, I'm also fine passing on him. But I do like the upside.
I mean, I guess I'm just the indifferent one, and I hope you're right about him, breaking out next year because I spent a first round pick with him in our main dynasty league last year as a quarterback, and this year, like, I think the Bears are a top 2 pick next year. I think they're a terrible team. They didn't do anything to put any weapons around him. Uh, they lost Allen Robinson. They replaced him with Brian Pringle and Equinemius St. Brown. Like, and Brian Pringle's having his own issues. Justin Fields started in 10 games last year. 5 of those he scored less than 10 points. Like, I love Justin Fields coming out and what he did last year, the way he looked last year, what the Bears did this offseason to put more pieces around him. I am not excited for Justin Fields, and I hope I'm wrong. Like I mentioned, I spent a first round pick on him last year in a dynasty league, so I hope I'm wrong with him. But I think the Bears are a bottom pick, and if they are a bottom pick in terms of dynasty, like, they could be looking at another quarterback because the quarterback class is so good next year. So he's a tough guy all around. Hopefully he improves some. He does have a little bit of rushing ability uh, that might be able to save him for fantasy reasons, but yeah, he's not even a top 2 quarterback, a quarterback or a backup for me.
I think that's the first guy that we've had outside of our rankings we're talking about in this, because I'm down at 25 here. But let's move on to number 20 on the list, and that is Matt Ryan, who Cody is very bullish on compared to us too. So I'm just going to go right back to you. You have him all the way up at 16 compared to Tyler and I's 21. What makes Matt Ryan different than these last 2 guys we've talked about?
I think Matt Ryan. Well, one, I think Matt Ryan is still a solid quarterback. He didn't have the best season last year in Atlanta. I'll admit that. They've gotten some pieces. I like what they added in Alex Pierce and Jelani Woods to add to that offense. They have Jonathan Taylor, and if you look last year at quarterbacks, Carson Wentz was number 13, and he's replacing Carson Wentz. And I think Matt Ryan, with an offensive line around him, weapons, can distribute the ball. It's not a sexy pick. It's not a great pick, but it's an option that he'll be, matchup dependent, whether you're willing to start him or not. Phillip Rivers 2 years ago, he had his games where you were willing to start him. Same thing. It's a guy who's put up points in the past. He can throw it for 300, 350 yards, get a couple touchdowns. Like, they're still going to go through Jonathan Taylor, but he's a safe option. He's going to get me 12 to 16 points. I don't expect 25 from him, but I might just need that 12 to 16.
Yeah. I don't like Matt Ryan in fantasy. He's definitely not draftable for me personally. Um, I'm just going to throw out some names here. You ready for this? All right. So,
Okay.
Nick Foles. All right. Carson Wentz, Trevor Siemian, Taylor Heineke, Tua, Jared Goff, Big Ben, all of which, and Geno Smith, all of which averaged more points last season than Matt Ryan. Fun fact. Now I understand that is last season. It is a new team. It is a new scheme. It is a different season. But Matt Ryan has done nothing but regress the last few years. I don't love him as a fantasy quarterback. I do have him very closely ranked to Ryan Tannehill personally, because I do think they're both similar. They're both older quarterbacks who are not flashy on a run first team. And run first team quarterbacks are not fun to have. They're frustrating because you just want points from your guy, but you know that ball is going to the running back first every time. And it's not the kind of guy I want on my team. Only reason I put Tannehill up there, well, we'll get to Tannehill later, so I'll talk about him later. But right now, Matt Ryan just he has no mobile ability too. On top of it, he just doesn't have anything that gets me like, you know what, he might get me some points this week. Um, yeah.
You can almost argue his weapons are better than last year's, though, which is the only reason that somebody I think could say like Matt Ryan could have a bit of a rise coming up. Like the run game's definitely better. You can go with that. The receiving options, I mean, when you consider he played most of the season without Calvin Ridley, are just as good or better, maybe even two. Like he had one player and it was Kyle Pitts, really, that was actually notable. So that's the only reason I could see that he would do better, but I have him down at 21 like Tyler because it doesn't excite me. He could be a great bye week fill if you have the right matchup in that situation. He's not someone I'm keeping on my roster long term unless he comes out and absolutely surprises me, and I don't see it happening, obviously. So
Let me put it this way. I don't think he's any better at all than Philip Rivers was for the Colts 2 seasons ago. Um, and I did not want Philip Rivers on my team at that time either. I think they're the same value, and I didn't want him then, so I don't want Matt Ryan now.
Philip Rivers was a top. He was a quarterback one. He finished 11th. So,
And I still didn't want him on my team. I'd never had him in my starting lineup. Did you have Philip Rivers at that time? Were you starting him?
I didn't have him on my team, but that doesn't take away the fact that he still put up quarterback one numbers. So what if you don't like the guy, you don't like the guy, you're not going to play with him. But if we're talking, from a statistical standpoint, Philip Rivers was a top quarterback when he was there 2 years ago. I think not Carson Wentz, he was the guy last year. Uh, Matt Ryan can be just as good in that system as Philip Rivers, and you could argue that the weapons are better because they have year 3 Jonathan Taylor, they have year 2 Michael Pittman, they added Alex Pierce in the second round. Like they have a solid defense. Like we've seen what he's done in the past. Like again, we're talking quarterback 16, or that's where I had him, but realistically, we're talking 20 on our board. Like again, and not being drafted, but they play the Jags twice a year. They play the Texans twice a year. Like it's not like he's not a bad streaming option either.
I hear you. I hear you. He's not a guy I'm going to roster anywhere, most likely, but I do understand your points here. I mean, at this point of the draft, I'm cool with not having a backup quarterback if this is the options remaining, and just playing the waiver wire if I really need somebody. The only reason I would get one of these guys as my number 2 quarterback, and that goes for Matt Ryan or any of the following guys on our list, um, would be because I drafted a starting quarterback late. If I really just said no quarterbacks and I let it all go, and people were drafting backups early, and it was a weird league, and I'm talking about my number 1 quarterback being a guy like Tua or Trey Lance or Trevor Lawrence, if something like that happens, then yeah, I want another quarterback, and if Matt Ryan's the best guy on the board, I'm stashing him. But otherwise, I'm cool playing the waiver wire here. And even with him ranked at 16, Cody, knowing the kind of person you are, you're probably cool with playing the waiver wire too.
Absolutely. I was going to say, we're talking a lot about these quarterbacks in this one, and I'm a big proponent of only having one quarterback on your roster. Now, if you want to take a flyer on a rookie or something like that, you think that could really break out, sure. But I really am like, get your quarterback late, get your solid one, whether that's a Matt Stafford or Tom Brady or someone like that, and then just play the waiver wire on their bye weeks because, like, unless something drastically happens, you're not starting Trevor Lawrence over Matt Stafford ever. So for me, it's kind of a waste of a roster spot. I understand what they're saying. If you get stuck with Trevor Lawrence and as your quarterback one, yeah, then you might want a second one so you're not fighting the waiver wire. But still, I'm a big proponent of a single quarterback league only having one quarterback.
yeah, and I mean these rankings are obviously for any listeners that have a 2 quarterback league as well, so we're going to keep going, but I'm looking at guys who could be great bye week fills at this point. I think I did move a lot of those young guys who have breakout potential higher in my rankings because of the whole, like, if I'm going to take them, it's going to be because there's a reason like that. But this next guy, I actually think could be a little bit of a sneaky guy to watch on your waiver wire. Number 21 on our list is Jameis Winston. Cody and I both have him at 20, Tyler at 22. Now, I only say that because I think people forget how good he was playing last year before he got injured. Like the Saints themselves, as a team, were playing well, but he had a couple of sneaky fantasy weeks where he was on our waiver wire articles on the couchgems.com. Like, this guy, if you're in trouble for a quarterback because of a bad matchup, because of an injury, something, he was a guy who could have filled in and done decent. And while there's a lot of question marks coming out of the injury, they built a good offense around him now in New Orleans. If he's going to succeed at any point in his career now, this is another guy where it's like, this is the time it's going to happen. And he's going to throw a ton of interceptions. He's like a discount Matt Stafford, really. But Jameis Winston has the chance to put up some solid weeks in relief, the bye week fill, whatever, just because we know he has the ability to throw 35, 40 touchdowns in a season.
You're not wrong. Like he's 20 for me because of the potential PUP and missing the first 6 weeks. Like if he's back week 1, like he is that borderline guy. Yes, he's going to have some high variance games where he throws, 4 picks, but they've added pieces around him. They were winning last year. Like the Saints, as fans, like we're kind of like the Saints, like what are they going to do this year? The Saints, best team, they think they're going to win this year, and they're going to compete with the Buccaneers in the NFC. So Jameis Winston, if he, when you're drafting, it's like, oh, it looks like he's going to start week 1. He might be a guy worth taking at the end if you wait to the very end for a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to add. Again, it's not a flashy pick. It's not a league winner, but if you're in a 2 quarterback league, you could do a lot worse than Jameis Winston as your number 2 quarterback.
Yeah, I think that can move us on. We have 3 guys left on the list. Number 22 is Ryan Tannehill. You seemed excited to talk about Ryan Tannehill before. So, Tyler, lead us off. You have him at 20 on your rankings.
Yeah, it's not that I'm excited to talk about him. Look, I know I'm a Titans fan, so you're probably thinking I'm going to be like, "Oh, Ryan Tannehill, let me tell you. Sneaky league winner." Like, no, that's not going to happen. Tannehill sucks as a fantasy quarterback. He's frustrating. The ball goes to Derrick Henry. It's what happens. And you know it's going to happen, and it's still going to happen. And Tannehill's not awesome, but I just wanted to talk him compared to Matt Ryan. Now, Tannehill is not exactly. I know he has the nickname Tanner Wheels in Tennessee. It doesn't mean he's actually great with his legs, but this dude actually has more rushing touchdowns than Lamar Jackson over the past 3 years. Fun fact. Tannehill scores touchdowns. With his legs. It's mostly because they fake the handoff to Derrick Henry and it leaves the entire side of the field open so you can just scramble it on in. But the dude is going to get some rushing touchdowns. He's still going to pass the ball. He's not going to put up big numbers. He doesn't have A.J. Brown anymore, so there goes a lot of the numbers he was getting. But, he does have Traylon Burks if the conditioning's okay. He does have Robert Woods still. He has Austin Hooper. He's going to do something through the air. He's still going to give you some points. Again, not a flashy pick, not a league winner, but definitely, again, just like I said with Jameis Winston, you could do worse as a quarterback too in a 2 quarterback league.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody who was actually a borderline QB1 2 seasons ago. Last year was not the greatest, but the Titans were decimated for a while. Obviously, the writing's on the wall. He's not going to be in Tennessee much longer, it seems like. He is definitely not the flashiest quarterback, but the fact that he did have a borderline QB1 season 2 years ago makes me think that you could do worse, and there is a chance that he does catch some magic if his weapons around him can get better conditioned and get healthy.
Yeah, I mean, he burned me last year because I bought into the Tanner Wheels thing, Snyder. But he has potential. Like it's no guarantee that he's not, still there. I know it doesn't seem likely at this point that he's back, after this season. But if he balls out, like they'll keep him around, and he has that potential. We'll have to wait and see what he does. The lack of weapons outside of Derrick Henry, which isn't really a weapon for a quarterback, anyways, in terms of fantasy, does scare me, which is why he's down here. But again, these guys that we're talking about now, they're all shots in the dark. Or, I mean, they still play the Jags, so that could be a streamable week that week if your main quarterback is on bye.
Yeah, if no one else has had anything to add here, we can move on to Tyler's favorite player in the league, Jared Goff. But surprisingly, Tyler is not the highest out of us on Jared Goff. Cody has him up at 18, showing there must think there's a lot of potential in that Detroit offense. Tyler at 23, me at 25. Is it the weapons around him, Cody? Why at 18?
Yeah, I mean, the weapons are a big thing. I mean, we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown break out at the end of last season. They went and added DJ Chark, a young wide receiver that we liked. Yes, he's coming off of a pretty serious injury, but he's a solid weapon. They traded up to get Jamison Williams. I mean, they're hoping that he plays right away. Yes, it's a rookie quarterback. They still have TJ Hawkinson, a top tight end in the league. Don't forget DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams in the backfield. So I actually really like the Detroit offense. Um, and then if you look at last year, he didn't have the best season. He was rated pretty low. But if you break the seasons in half, the second half of last season looked a lot better. And then the last quarter of the season um, that he played, he did miss weeks 16 and 17. So if you the last 4 games in that season, he had 17 or more points 3 of those 4 games. He only threw 2 interceptions since week 8 last year. So he started to feel like he got comfortable in that offense. They've added more pieces around him. So I'm surprised Snyder isn't a little bit higher. Maybe he was a little afraid to put him too high because of all the slack we gave him last year for saying where he is compared to Matt Stafford. But yeah, I like Jared Goff. I think Detroit would be a lot of fun teams. And then back to what we said on last week's show, or not last week's show, a couple shows ago. Um, I think we'll see a lot progress when they're on Hard Knocks this year as well, seeing up close person, different perspective. So I do like Jared Goff as a quarterback 2 option in your 2 quarterback leagues.
I really, really hope that Jared Goff is a top 10 quarterback this year. Uh, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying I think he will be a top 10 quarterback. I'm not even saying he has the potential to be a top 10 quarterback. I am just saying I really hope he is a top 10 quarterback this year. I would love to see Goff ball out. Um, and honestly, like Cody said, I like the weapons in Detroit. I really think the Detroit offense is going to be fun to watch. If they can really start putting those pieces together, they could steal some games from some better teams with those pieces. And I think you could do a lot worse than Jared Goff. I mean, I know I keep saying that for these guys, but uh, Jared Goff proved he can be a startable fantasy quarterback when he was with the Rams. And last year with Detroit, he still had some games where, look, it even had guys like us looking at the waiver wire like, do I really pick up Jared Goff and stream him this week? Like, he just put up so many points last week. Do I actually do this? He's got that potential. He can put up those big weeks every now and then. The biggest problem with Jared Goff, and the reason I have him low, it's not because of the slack. It's because you can't predict it. I feel like Jared Goff is one of those guys that is going to put up random big points on a week that he's not supposed to. It's not going to be the week where it's oh look, it's the Jags versus the Lions. Oh, let's stream Jared Goff. No, that's not going to be the week that he does it. It's going to be the week that it's oh look, it's the Jags versus the Lions versus the Bucks, and out of nowhere, Goff is just going to put up like 35 points and go crazy, and everyone's going to be like, "What was that?" That's going to be the week he does it, and you guys are nodding a little bit. You know I'm telling the truth here, and that's why I have Goff low because you will not be able to predict when he has his big weeks. But with those offensive weapons, he has the potential to have the big weeks.
It's funny that you.
Man, no, go ahead, Cody.
I was going to say it's funny that you say that because his 3 biggest games last year were against San Francisco, which he put up almost 29 points. Green Bay, which 18 and a half, and he followed that up with a 17 game as well. And then Arizona, he had over 20 points. So like 3 playoff teams balled out against, but then you get to teams like Pittsburgh, he had under 5 points. Like, yes, their defense is good, but that team struggled like nobody could score. So definitely a solid argument there. But George, I cut you off.
No, I was basically going to say, like, Snyder took the words right out of my mouth. It's just the inconsistency. And it's going to be such a weird thing talking about Jared Goff because I think Detroit's going to have a decent amount of weapons that are ranked fairly highly at the running back position, the wide receiver position, even the tight end position. But then their quarterback is going to be like sitting way down here at like, oh, he's barely cracking our top 24. And it's like, how does that actually work? And it's just inconsistency. And I think maybe all of them are going to have a little bit of inconsistency because they're a growing young team, but they're going to find points somewhere. And it's just going to be how do they find them and when.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid point, and I think, inconsistency is a great way to talk about the last quarterback we're going to talk about at ranked number 24, and that is Carson Wentz. Uh, I have him at 22. Again, I'm the highest on him. It seems like in a lot of these rankings, and this is where I went with some safer options over some young breakout compared to the rest of the guys. Snyder has him at 26. George has him at 24 as well. Yeah, Carson Wentz, inconsistent, but I still think he has potential to be a solid quarterback on some weeks, which is why I think he can fit in nicely at quarterback 22. Don't expect a lot out of him. But unless you guys have anything else to add on Carson Wentz, I feel like we're all on the same page because our rankings are so close.
This might sound dumb, but I think Carson Wentz sees ghosts, especially after how last year ended. He's got to confront a lot of those ghosts in week 1. We are going to see how successful Carson Wentz is going to be in a Washington uniform in 1 week. That's my opinion. If he busts week 1, the train's off the rails. I think he's going to be a mess. If he does good week 1, he has a chance to be a decent starting quarterback. Not saying he's going to be a top 12, anything like that, but like this ranking or maybe a little higher is possible.
Hasn't Carson been through enough? Look, he went through all the BS in Philly, getting injured in an MVP season, watching a backup take the Super Bowl, and having everyone clamoring for the backup. And he goes to the Colts and only needs to beat the crappy Jags to make the playoffs, and he can't do it. Maybe because the team abandoned their best player in the most important game, but that's another argument. But after all that, the dude ends up having the team give up on him, and he has to face the Jags in week 1. Really?
And
Like,
Doug Peterson.
really, NFL. Doug Peterson and the Jags in week 1. Like, hasn't he been through enough? You had to do it to him like that. Like, you can't give him 1 week before having to do that. Like, it's just rude. Like, I think the NFL is just like poking a stick at Carson Wentz from the top and laughing. And I honestly feel bad for the guy. But I agree with you, George. I think if this guy comes out and puts up 5 points in week 1, he's done. He's not going to have a season. It's over. He's not. It's in his head. He's out of it. If he comes out and puts up 35 points against the Jags in week 1, which, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but it's possible. It's the Jags. They're terrible. They suck for a reason. If he comes out and puts up big points against the Jags in week 1, really redeems himself, like, he might honestly start clicking and putting it together and putting up some decent points on different weeks, because we've seen Wentz do it in the past. I mean, he isn't far removed from an MVP caliber season. It really was not that long ago that he was there. And I know the cats tell me to wrap it up, so I will try to calm it down here, but he does have that potential. I know it sounds like I'm really riding the Wentz train. I'm not. I'm the lowest out of everybody on him, but just know that he is a guy you can keep an eye on as a potential streamer this season off the waiver wire if he does get it to click.
1 week.
I think, like you mentioned, you might know after 1 week, and as much slack as we give him, he did finish as quarterback 13 last year. So he does have potential, but that wraps up picks 13 through 24. If you want to see the rest of how we rank the rest of the starting quarterbacks, be sure to check out the couchgms.com under the player rankings tab, quarterbacks. You can see all 32. We might add some more as the season progresses, as we start getting some backups, maybe like a Matt Corral after he takes over for Sam Darnold in week 4. But we'll talk more about that as the season progresses. But as always, thanks for checking out another episode of the Couch GMs podcast.
And guys, I guarantee you're listening to this and you're having some opinions about things we've said about some of these players, and you're like, man, I should give them a piece of my mind. Well, what are you waiting for? We're right here. Come at us. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you thought of the rankings, where your rankings are at. Ask us some questions. Hey, who should I draft? What kind of a league should I be in? What the heck does this mean in fantasy? You ask us, we'll answer the questions. Either way, this podcast is more fun for us and more fun for you if you get involved.
Yes, it is, Tyler, and thank you all again for listening in to the Couch GMs podcast. For Cody Roadcap and Tyler Snyder, I'm George Kerth. We'll see you all next week.
Boom.